Good Wednesday morning, everyone. Paul Burkhart, PB Sports here with you. I had to jump on a live this morning to go over some of the things that have been going on last couple of days. Lots of drama on a couple of different fronts, and two of those I'm going to discuss with you today. The Nico Harrison firing obviously is at the top of pretty much everybody's list and is getting a lot of media attention, and I wanted to address that. And then the lack of young QB patience going on by lots of people in the media. I'm also going to touch on Brian Daboll here in a minute as well, and Dan Orlovsky's comments about he thinks it was a bad move because Jackson Dart and Brian Daboll had something special going on. So I'll address those three things. Let me first start with Nico Harrison. I spoke a lot about this at the actual trade in February. Hey, Zach, what's going on? In February, and those videos are on YouTube, and I describe all of my feelings about the trade at the time, what I thought about Nico Harrison, and obviously that's February. That's 9+ months ago, February 2nd, I believe it was, sometime in February. So essentially 9 months later, and now he's been fired. And I want to talk about why I actually believe he was fired. And what I actually believe was the right move at the time, and did my opinion change in those 9 months? So let's first start with the firing. The backlash from the Dallas Mavericks fans it has been insane, and I think that it got to a point where the decision was made that we don't really even at this point care how talented Nico Harrison or not he is, that he was associated with the trade and the fallout, and that the only answer at that point yesterday when this happened was we need to get rid of him, as if that's going to solve the problem. It's really not going to solve the problem. Newsflash, it's still ownership and Patrick Dumont related. It's still Jason Kidd related. It's still associated with the Mavericks. Because there was one sacrificial lamb is not going to bring it back for the Mavs fans. It's not going to take it and make it like it didn't ever happened. All right. So Nico's gone, but that doesn't change the fact that you're not going to get him back. It doesn't change the fact that Kyrie Irving is still hurt. And it doesn't change the fact that Anthony Davis is always hurt and he's not playing right now. And it doesn't change the fact that Cooper Flagg is 18 years old, and they're trying to find their way as a team. So this is a short-term fix for a bigger problem in terms of the fans' perspective. So let's go to the trade. At the time, and we have to understand, at the time of the trade versus now is different. You cannot take what's going on right now and then just take that and go put it 9 months ago, because there's two totally different Luka Dončić going on right now. And maybe the trade caused that to happen, but it was not happening in Dallas. Can argue the reason till the cows come home. Luka Dončić was due, or about to be due, a super max contract. 5 years, $345 million, folks. That's $250 million that you were about to be on the hook for because of his tenure and accomplishments as an NBA player. You had a one-dimensional Luka Dončić. You had an overweight Luka Dončić. You had, by all accounts, a heavily drinking, a heavily smoking Luka Dončić. You had a whiner. I'm going to get to that, Zach. And a whiner in Luka Dončić. If you've ever owned a business, or you've ever managed a business at a high enough level where you were involved in any significant decisions for said company, you cannot just take into consideration the performance of said person, player, employee, or whatnot. You have to look at the entire big picture. How does it fit? Is it the right person? Can this person lead said department or program or team or company, whatever the case may be? And, the highlight was circulating again yesterday in the locker room of the finals when Nico Harrison took the beer out of his hand. Folks, he didn't just walk up to him and take a beer out of his hand for the sake of taking a beer out of his hand because he wanted to be some hard guy. But there's a lot of accounts from a lot of different people that he was a heavy drinker. And he probably felt that was a bad image. Maybe it's a bad look. You probably shouldn't do that on TV. But it was a bad look for what was probably well known on the team, within ownership. They were probably trying to address it. Felt like it was a bad look. He grabs the beer out of his hand, and then he gives a dab to the guy next to him, which looked like a coach, or maybe it was even his father. I'm not positive about that, so don't quote me. And then he kind of just gives a stare to Luka and walks out of the room. Now, what a lot of people don't know is there was a player option that was going to take place with Luka as well. He will have had to decide if he wanted to continue with the Mavericks. And I believe, I'm not 100% positive on this, but I believe had he opted out, he forgoes that right to that Supermax money because he goes to someplace else and he starts over with the tenure. There was some belief, by all accounts at the time, that other teams were loading up to make it attractive for him to come there. And so Nico Harrison in Dallas was forced with a decision. Do we want to commit to this man to be the leader of our franchise for the next 5 years, knowing that we have A, B, C, D, E, and F challenges going on? And can we take the performance of said individual? Will it outweigh all of this? I think everybody that was, maybe not the Dallas fans, but everybody from the outside, I think, including myself, got frustrated watching Luka Dončić play for the Dallas Mavericks in that he was constantly complaining. It was constantly an issue. It became constantly about him. You cannot argue the man's offensive ability. It's one of the greatest we have ever seen. And for those of you who don't know my background, basketball has been my life since basically 4th grade. All right. I talk a ton about football and I'm huge into football, but basketball was my original true love and my original true following. It got hard to watch Luka Dončić play because I'm not just looking at what he's doing on the offensive end and what type of talent he has. I'm looking at all of the other intangibles too. Having been a longtime coach, I just look at things through a different lens. I'm not just a fanatic. I'm not just a fan. Is he going to put up 45, 12, and 10 today? Yes, I'm looking at that, but it isn't the only thing that I'm looking at. So from a business perspective and an ownership perspective, having done that, never a decision on that magnitude, but whether it was an 80, 100, 120, 140, $150,000 employee, I had to make those decisions. Are they best for what we're doing? Are they the best fit? Is it money well spent? Is the return what we want? What are the short, middle, and long-term effects of having said player for the next 5 years committed at $345 million? Simple math, guys. It's about $70 million a year for a one-dimensional player and all of those things. Severely overweight and limited and slow. Smoking, drinking, whining, partying, complaining with the refs. If you're Nico Harrison and you have to make decisions that are in the best interest of the team, and by the way, Nico Harrison was a former Nike executive. Mark Cuban hired him, and then Michael Finley, many of you maybe have watched his career with the Mavs and another team or two, is the assistant GM. And when you are appointed to that position, you are making decisions in the best interest of the team, the franchise, the city, the NBA, all of it. Clearly, they didn't feel that Luka was the long-term solution when you factored in that money. You can hit me up. You can argue with me till the cows come home. The Luka Dončić today, in terms of all of those things, And we don't know about the drinking and the smoking and all of that. Haven't really heard anything on that front, if he's doing it or not. What we see today is different than what we saw then. You cannot take that away, folks. We can't just grab like a magic eraser and erase that all out as if that never happened. Perhaps this was the greatest wake-up call of Luka's life. And then perhaps in conjunction with, hey, I know LeBron's kind of walking away. I get a chance to go to LA. They want me. They basically called a sit down in New York. I talk about that a lot. And they basically rolled out the carpet and said, you're our guy. We want to build the future around you. We want to build the Lakers around you. But they 100% made it clear, folks. And JJ Redick said it, and Pelinka said it, more so Redick, that we heard in the public. We need to get into better shape as a team. This is post-trade, before the end of the year or at the end of the year. He's speaking, you know it, early February or whenever it was in February that Luka came and end of the season, you could see that the man is not in supreme superstar shape, period. And I don't think there's anybody on this planet that can argue that. And if there's nobody on this planet that can argue that, why would you pay somebody $345 million over 5 years that isn't totally committed to being the very best person and player they can be, that will be the face of your franchise and receive $1/3 billion to be that? How can you make that decision, folks? The circumstances then and what you see now are two totally different things. And whether it's Baker Mayfield 1.0 and some of the things that he had to go through, there's a lot of guys. You can go back to Chris Carter back with the Minnesota Vikings was another guy I often go back to. And then his mentorship of Randy Moss. Randy Moss was a big problem in his young years, despite all the talent. And Chris Carter took him under his wing. Sometimes there's different, just like in our lives, there's a certain series of events that take place that impact us so deeply that we need to reflect and we need to make some changes. And what happened in Dallas deeply affected Luka Dončić. And I think he realized he needed to do some things different. So he went out and he committed himself. And in basically 3 months or so, loses 32 pounds. He's acting a different part. Not only did he lose the weight, his face looks different. And anybody who's ever studied people that drink heavily, and I'm not one of them, I've never been a real drinker, you can see in the face, not just the weight, but you can see that he's probably changed some of his habits in his life. And he committed himself to be the man. And then I'm going to take this franchise on my back and I'm going to learn how to be a better leader. And I'm going to start with the way my body looks and what that weight loss allows me to do on the floor. And maybe I could become, instead of a one-dimensional player, maybe I could become 1.5, trying to work my way into a two-way player. And I'll be up for a bunch of money again. I sacrificed basically, I think it's $116 or so million is what he lost in that deal, but he'll have an opportunity to make it up. In the popularity and fame of Hollywood and his body transformation and just the whole LA market. And if he wins a championship, he'll get plenty of money, not just from the Lakers, but he'll get plenty of money and sponsorships to make up that deal, make up for the lost money in that deal. Luka Dončić is responsible, in my opinion, equally as anything that Nico Harrison is responsible for in Dallas. And I think any suggestion to the contrary is short-sighted because Nico Harrison had to take all of that into consideration. And folks, I believe it was probably on what I saw was alarming. You know, what they saw behind the scenes is a lot more than we know. Period. So if you're making that decision and you're going to go to ownership and say, hey, I want this guy. We need this guy. The price tag, is $345, as in million, $345 million. You going to go make that decision? Knowing what you knew then, if you're in charge, you're going to make that decision. If you've run a business, anybody watching this, If you've run a business, you're not making that, and you did it on any type of level that was, you did it well, you're not making that decision. You can't make that decision. He gave you every reason to not make that decision. So here's where the problem comes in. And to Zach's question, but you're telling me that's the best trade package they could get for him. See, this is where it gets really tricky for me. Nico Harrison's not a dumb man. It's not Nico Harrison's first trip around the block. There's something very fishy with what went on behind the scenes there. And I think there's more that meets the eye. If you're going to trade a generational type of offensive talent, even with some of the baggage that Luka Dončić had, you are never doing a deal behind closed doors without offering that asset up to the highest bidder to get the most value in return, and you create a bidding war. And everybody knows that there would be a lot of high bidders for Luka Dončić, even in the state that he was in. A lot of people would just put up with that. That's maybe sad, but it's true. So why was it only the Los Angeles Lakers? It's a question that's never going to go away. It's always going to be wondered. It's always going to be asked. I can give you my thoughts and my opinion. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Magic Johnson, Kobe Bryant, LeBron James, Luka Dončić. The Lakers forever. I mean, we're talking 1975. So for the last 50 years, they've had to have the or close to the superstar in the league. So how in the world did Luka Dončić end up in LA and, to our knowledge, be the only team that he was offered to? What would cause that to happen? How could that possibly happen? How would Dallas's ownership allow that? Mark Cuban was involved still at the time. Patrick Dumont, Michael Finley, anybody else advising, who would advise that? You'd have to be a fool to do that. You cannot like Luka Dončić, and you could feel the way I felt that he wasn't worth the $345 at the time. But irrespective, and regardless of the fact that you don't feel he's worth that, if you no longer want him, you get the most amount of value from over here and you move on. Good luck to you. We like what we have. There's nobody on this planet, I don't believe it, that could tell me that they were truly happy with a return of Anthony Davis, who's older and who's broken down and who is injured constantly, and Max Christie for Luka Dončić. I cannot be convinced. Never. So what would cause that to happen? You can call this a conspiracy theory. You can call this whatever you want. And somebody reached out and hit me up yesterday on X and says, so what you're suggesting is if there was any kind of funny business by the league to ensure that Dallas would get the number one pick, if you do this for us and you only offer him to the Lakers, we get you the number one pick. In order to do that, Dallas would have to be in the lottery, which is what, 13 teams? Somebody correct me if I'm wrong. I believe it's 13 teams. You have to be bad enough to get into the lottery. So Kyrie Irving would have to get hurt. Anthony Davis would have to get hurt for you to be in the lottery for any fixing to go on. I think LeBron James even admitted way back when it was awful suspicious that the Cleveland Cavaliers got number one pick. Folks, I by nature am not a conspiracy theorist. 14 teams. Thank you. So you had to finish in the bottom 14, which is essentially half. The bottom half of the league. You had to make sure that you were there to be, and look at what their odds were, folks. I don't know exactly where they fell in that, but look at what their odds were to get the number one pick. It was basically a statistically impossible. It would be an anomaly for that to happen. And who's the number one pick? So about the conspiracy theorist part, I'm generally not a conspiracy. Yeah, they finished 13 or 14. Yeah. And you basically have the worst or very close to the worst odds. And so I'm not a conspiracy theorist by nature, but I look at the evidence and I look at the likelihood, and I'm able to, they were in the play-in tournament. And I look at the likelihood of how something can happen statistically and metrically here versus here. What's the likelihood? Is it a miracle? Like, how could that happen? What's the NBA's history? What's the pattern of behavior? Has this happened before? Without question. Without question, it's happened before. I don't want to hear about Ernst & Young or whoever manages that is supposedly the security of those envelopes. BS. It's just naive to think that there are not things that go on like that in business, in life, in business, and in sports. I'm just not naive enough. I've been around enough to see enough things take place. We do this, you do that. It's going to come off this way, but we'll make sure this and that. No possible way Nico Harrison offered Luka Dončić to the Los Angeles Lakers only, and somehow didn't get Austin Reeves. And anybody who's followed me knows that after that took place, at the end of, or even during, and even at the end of the season, I created a graphic and I went online and I said, you ask LeBron some kind of way to opt out, you trade Luka to the highest bidder, and you build the team around Austin Reeves. That was my suggestion, because Luka was still the same guy in LA after the trade, not this year, still last year we're talking about. He was still the same guy, and not much had changed. It only changed after the season when Redick publicly said what he said, and they probably got a hold of him behind the scenes and said, hey, LeBron's going to have the opportunity to opt in or opt out. You're our guy going forward. We're not re-signing LeBron. He's 40 whatever, and we're not, you're our guy, and Austin Reeves is our guy, and we're going to build, and we want you to be the man. And he went and changed his, appears that he went and changed his life. He certainly transformed his body and his ability. So I believe that there was a favor done. So if you as Dallas did not want to commit that money to him, and you were given assurances by the league, which, by the way, anytime you want to make a trade of any level, it's got to be approved by the league. Anytime you make a trade of this magnitude, everybody's antennas up. It doesn't just happen. It doesn't. Who they're going to, how it impacts the league with somebody like a Luka Dončić is a whole lot different than, say, I don't know, Bogdan Bojanovic going to whatever team, or Michael Porter Jr. going to whatever team. It doesn't hold the same magnitude. It's like if Jokic got traded tomorrow or Steph Curry got traded tomorrow, they're looking at it differently. They're also looking at, where does that marketable star end up? Call it conspiracy or not, they don't want to see Steph. And I'm not saying Steph Curry, please don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying Steph Curry's getting traded, or I'm not saying even a younger star like a Jokic or Giannis or any of those guys are getting traded, or a Tyrese Maxey or something like that. But if those guys were to be traded, they don't want to see them go to New Orleans. It's not marketable. This is the business of the NBA. This is business in general. These types of things are looked at. So on the surface, the fans of Dallas got so upset about Nico Harrison. But from a business perspective, how do you give him $330 million when all of those things were what they were? I don't make that decision. Sorry. And from a coach's perspective, he's not even a two-way player, which I happen to put a lot of emphasis on. I required my guys, again, never at that level, but I required my guys to play on both sides or both ends of the court, both sides of the ball. Certainly, if you were a captain, everything that the upper echelon of Luke is my co-host. Luke, my co-host, was my best player on that particular team. And when he didn't do what he was supposed to do and he lost his captaincy, we've talked about it on a show. So if Luke was way overweight and he was drinking and he was smoking, and I'm just metaphorically, I'm just comparing it, I'm going to look at the situation differently than a guy who's doing everything he's supposed to do. Now, you talk about that situation, $3 billion. Not that the DeMont family, which is the Venetian and Las Vegas family, not that they can't afford it. That isn't the question. You don't just throw away money. And folks, the way he was acting wasn't a good investment. I'll get hate for that, but it's not a good investment based on what you had at the time to evaluate. Luka went to the Lakers, and he's done this full transformation. Let me ask you a question. Why didn't he do that in Dallas? Because if he did that in Dallas, they probably would have done things differently. Maybe it took that to get him to make some changes. And sometimes that happens in life. Sometimes we have to, change of scenery, change of situation, a life moment of that magnitude motivates you. And it appears to have motivated him. It appears to have humbled him. You're no longer wanted here. Okay, you're wanted here, but you got to do A, B, and C that you didn't do over there. Folks, don't ignore this. Please, don't ignore this. Everybody wants to go tear Nico Harrison down. He had a responsibility and an obligation to make responsible decisions for the Dallas Mavericks, and giving Luka Dončić $3 billion would have been one of the most irresponsible moves, period. So you go give him 345 over 5, and he continues to live the lifestyle that he does, and he never grows as a player like it appears he has now. What have you done? You've enabled the problem to continue, in my opinion. Likely, it wouldn't have changed, or it wouldn't have changed much, and it took this to change. So Dallas fans, you got your wish. Nico Harrison is gone, but that does not change any of the facts that I've just laid out. And if you were tasked with that same decision, and you took everything into consideration because it was your job, and you had a whole lot of people to take into consideration when making that decision, it wasn't just about you. It wasn't just about Luka. It was about a lot of other things as well. You cannot make that decision in good conscience. And he may have walked for nothing. That was possible. What do we know? Do we know if he was considering? People say, oh, he loved it. And his father said, oh, he was committed. He was? Can anybody sit here today and say that Luka Dončić was 100% committed to the Dallas Mavericks? If you say yes, I got a question for you, because everything that I listed out would suggest otherwise. It would suggest that he wasn't committed. He wasn't acting appropriately. He wasn't doing the appropriate things. Irrespective of all of his talent, that sits over here. And yes, I get it. But what about all of this? I used to tell a particular person that worked for me, he would constantly make mistakes. But then he would do some things that would blow your mind and say, man, that's what I always teach and motivate and advise on. See, when you're focused, you do all of this. And it's amazing. And I love that about you. When you're not focused and you're just off on something, you do this, and this. Drives me crazy. And it hurts not just whatever, the sale or the service we were providing. It hurts everybody around you, because he was a team lead. Those decisions and those the level of performance was affecting everybody else around him. It was much bigger than him, is the point. So what I would always use the analogy, and he wasn't really a sports fan, so I don't think it really resonated, but most people I talk to understand this. You can't be really good in the football sense. You can't be really good at offense in football, be 50% on defense and 50% on special teams, and expect to be a very good team. You're going to be right around 8-9, 9-8, 7-10. You're going to be maybe average. You can't be good at special teams and good at offense and poor at defense. You've got to be equal. If you want to be great, if you want to be the best you can be, you've got to be really good at offense, defense, and special teams. If you want a chance to be in it to win it, you have to do that. You can have a slight deficiency here and there, something workable, something fixable, but you can't be broken in one way. Now, the dude was putting up numbers. I got it. He was also a minus a lot of times because he couldn't stop his own shadow. So you're going to invest $750 million into all of that? No, never. No chance. Now, would you give that to him? It appears things have changed. So circumstances change. You assess the new circumstance and you pay him accordingly. But your problem's not going away. You're not getting him back. And you can't change the facts of who Luka Dončić was versus what he appears to be today.